All right, can everyone see my screen? Vaguely nod. Okay, I see some vague nods. Um, Hey everyone, so let me start my little timer so I don't go over time. Hey everyone, my name is Kutub Gandhi. I am a PhD student studying games and philosophy, and I personally believe that games can be art. And I'm here to maybe convince you of that fact. So, games are a relatively new medium. Here I'm talking about video games specifically. Video games have been around for like 50-ish years, and they've only really gotten into their own in the last 20 or even 10 years. Compare that to like paintings and stuff, which have been around for hundreds of years. So before we start to talk about like how games can be art and like whether they deserve the same respect and stuff, let's talk about what art is first of all. So this image, probably art. It's well painted. It's interesting. It took a lot of skill. It's formal, I guess. It's a painting that a lot of people would consider art. How about this one? This one is a bit more controversial. While I'm not saying anything myself or my own opinions, a lot of people say that like, oh, it looks childish. It looks like, a beginner could draw this and, this and that. And what about something like this? It's squares. What is it? What is it doing? It is squares. And so while again, I'm not saying whether I believe this is art or not, a lot of people look at this and say, oh, there's no skill involved. It doesn't evoke the same emotions. It's not as formal. But there are people who do believe that these kinds of things are art. So this kind of debate is a very, very long and complex one. I am using one slide on it, but there are literally books written about this topic. So the dictionary definition of art is who cares? Stop using a dictionary to sound smart. And jokes aside, I do kind of want to step away from this extremely formal idea of we have to define this is art, this isn't. I think that when we talk about what art is, we're really kind of saying, oh, this is interesting. It evokes emotions in me. I think that it was like well made, et cetera, et cetera. And if we look at art in that way, I think we can have a more interesting conversation, even if it isn't as philosophically formal as I would like to be. So different media, we talk about different media being artistic in different ways. For example, with paintings, we talk about maybe the skill and the visual effects and, whether it's well done, But with movies, we kind of talk differently. We talk about their plots and we talk about their cinematography. And to be clear, we still talk about movies as like beautiful pieces. But if a movie was just beautiful in the same way that a painting was, people wouldn't call that a good movie. They'd say, oh, that's a neat slideshow of interesting visual things. And then with books, it's even less, there's no visuals at all, assuming you're talking about a novel. It's all about the wordplay and how the authors use that. And so this kind of leads to the question, if paintings are artistic based on visuals, roughly speaking, movies based on cinematography, roughly speaking, and books on wordplay, then how do we talk about games in an artistic sense? What's artistic about games and what have you? So as the title of this slide kind of gives away, the neat part about games is that they're interactive. And so when we think about games as art, I really want to talk about games that use their interactivity in interesting ways that push that kind of boundary. And I want to be clear that there are a lot of visually stunning games out there that deserve a lot of respect and have a lot of skill that went into them. And I don't want to say that these are like less than or whatever. It's just that if a game was only visually stunning, we would say, oh, that's a pretty 3D game, but it isn't really like an artistic game, or it doesn't, push the bounds of interactivity like games can. So the first way in which games can use their interactivity in an artistic fashion and push the boundaries and such is a game's ability to provide perspective taking, which is when you put yourself in the shoes of the main character. This is a common staple of books and movies as well, but games can push it a little bit further by being but through the fact that you are controlling the main character, you are literally in their shoes, or, well, that was still a metaphor, so I apologize for that, a little more literally in their shoes. And a game that I'd like to bring up as an example is Gris. Gris is a game about trauma and grief. In the beginning, the main character suffers some trauma. It's kind of unclear what it is, but I think that was meant to be intentionally vague so you can put your own ideas onto it. The main character suffers some sort of trauma, and as you go through the game, you mend with her. You bring yourself whole, you make yourself happy, and you feel her traumas just as you feel how you've grown with her. And I think that's something that you couldn't do in a movie just because you are controlling the main character and you're playing along with her. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to explain considering that this is still just still images. If you really want the experience, you're going to have to go play Gris. Oh no. The second way that games can really use this idea of interaction is interacting with your beliefs. I imagine that everyone on this call believes to some extent that they are moral, upstanding citizens. The game Papers, Please is a game where you are a Soviet era border patrol guard and you are trying to ensure that only the right people get into the country. Well, the game starts off pretty simply, but then it starts to throw more and more challenges at you. Do you let someone in who doesn't have a passport but is being, persecuted in their home country? Do you let someone in when they just want to be reunited with their husband, despite the fact that they have a minor typo on their entrance papers? And all of that is happening to the backdrop of the pressure back home where your family is starving and you have to do this job correctly in order to put food on the table. And so in this way, the game takes your belief of, I'm an upstanding person, I would do the right things, and challenges you harder and harder and makes you reflect on that fact. Another game that's even more intense is the Stanley Parable. In it, you play as this character Stanley, who is a boring humdrum office worker. The game sets up Stanley as this boring character. Stanley has no control over his life. He just does what other people tell him to. And in the end, he's a character controlled by you. But then the game kind of flips that on its head and points out, hey, aren't you like Stanley? Don't you have no control over your life? Aren't you forced to do what other people tell you? And in this way, it breaks down the notions of free will that a lot of us have. And it can only do that by the fact that you are playing it. I have a bit more to say, but unfortunately it gets into spoiler territory and this and that.